All right, so welcome everyone. Good morning / afternoon. And thank you all so much for joining us for today's virtual lecture. My name is Olivia Brown. I am the Community Programs Coordinator for the Mercer Museum in Fonthill Castle. And we're very delighted to host this virtual lecture, Beyond the Frame, and very excited that you are all here to join us. I've already heard that some folks are happy to have the virtual option to sit on their living room couches with their lunches and to learn a little something on this nice Tuesday. So before we get started, I know some of you have been to our other virtual lectures, but for those of you who are new or need a refresher, I just want to take one moment to familiarize you with the Zoom platform. As you have probably noticed, your microphones and videos have automatically been turned off. And if you have any questions throughout or need to get in touch with me if you're having any technical difficulties, you can use the Q&A feature that is on the Zoom toolbar. If you are on a computer or a phone, the toolbar should be located at the bottom of your screen, and it'll be on the top if you're located on a tablet. So if you need anything throughout the talk or have questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we'll leave time at the end for our speaker to answer all of your questions that you come up with throughout. So today's program is part of a special series we have been doing for the Mercer Museum's exhibit this fall called 200 Years of Bucks County Art. This exhibit highlights local portraiture and landscape painting by notable American artists and important regional painters as well. It also has numerous companion pieces such as historical artifacts, documents, and images from the Bucks County Historical Society collection that are paired with these paintings. We are very excited to have this exhibit on display through the end of the year, and I would like to take a moment to thank the exhibit sponsors, without whom we would not be able to have this exhibit on display. So a very special thank you to our sponsors, Univest, Visit Bucks County, Tom Thomas, Gratz Gallery and Conservation Studio, Penn Color, Susan E. Kane, Kathleen F. O'Day and Lawrence Grimm Jr., and Brian and Louise McLeod. Thank you for all of your support in getting this exhibit up and running here at the Mercer Museum. It is open through the end of the year, so for any of you who have not yet made it to the Mercer Museum and might be able to, please come visit us. We do have information on our website about how to purchase tickets, or you can give our front desk a call, and the exhibit will be included with museum admission. So I am delighted to introduce you to today's speaker, Cory Amsler. Now, Cory is the Vice President of Collections and Interpretation here at the Mercer Museum in Fonthill Castle, and he heads the curatorial team that put this exhibit together and really brought our art collection to life. So today's talk is going to delve deeper into the historical and social context of some of the paintings in 200 Years of Bucks County Art, and really talk about what's happening beyond the frame, hence the title of today's lecture. So I hope you all enjoy the talk, and without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Cory.
Well, hello everyone out there in Zoom land. Thank you very much for attending this. I'm going to go ahead and start by getting my slides up here. Hopefully this will go smoothly. There we go. So again, thanks for attending today. Really appreciate it. This is actually the third talk that I've delivered as part of our 200 Years of Bucks County Art exhibit program series. The first was kind of an overview describing the growth of the Historical Society's painting collection and the roles played by, excuse me, the Historical Society's founder, W.W.H. Davis, and by museum founder Henry Mercer in shaping and forming that painting collection. The second talk was a bit of a deeper dive into some of these works. It was entitled Beyond the Frame and focused, as Olivia said, on context and what may have been happening just outside or beyond the confines of the frame in which the painting was housed. This presentation we're calling Beyond the Frame 2. So it's taking a look at a few additional paintings and some of the historical context behind them. We're going to visit around 13 paintings or sets of paintings that are featured in the exhibit. Again, looking a little deeper at the content of the work, looking at some of the artists or the sitters' biographies, the scene being portrayed, and of course a dose of historical background. I will say also that the slides you're going to see, in addition to the paintings, pretty much all of the other images that are included in this presentation are all drawn from the collections of the Mercer Museum, Bucks County Historical Society, and Museums Library. So with that little bit of a preamble, let's jump right in. This is a painting that some of you may be familiar with. It is certainly a well-recognized painting in the Society's collection. So what's the scene here? This is the rescue of the colors. So in May of 1862, the 104th Pennsylvania Regiment, the Bucks County Regiment, was encamped on the Virginia Peninsula, attempting, along with George McClellan's Army of the Potomac, to capture Richmond. It is early that morning of May 31st. The regiment was having their meal, and suddenly they were told to get into line of battle. And within minutes, they were taking fire from Confederate troops coming out of the woods. And you see those woods to the right of this painting. As the regiment, the 104th Regiment advanced, they stuck their flags, their set of colors, in the ground in front of a rail fence. And then the regiment was gradually forced back by numbers of Confederate troops. At that point, General Davis, the commander of the regiment, or at this point, Colonel Davis, who's standing here very calmly over here, holding his wounded arm, orders the color guard to spring forward and rescue the colors. Major Grease, who's seen here, springs forward in an effort. He's mortally wounded. Another member of the color guard, John Hartley, is killed. But this fellow here, Corporal Hiram Purcell, manages to take the colors, carry the colors back over the rail fence where he's hit by a bullet and sent reeling, but he's able to bear the colors off of the field. For that act of heroism in 1894, Hiram Purcell was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. And this is the Medal of Honor in the Historical Society's collection that he was awarded. He lived on to see his act commemorated in the painting that incidentally was painted by the 19th century artist William Trigo, who's noted for his large canvases and historical subjects. And here's Trigo sitting in front of the Rescue of the Colors painting as he's completing it in 1899. Partially paralyzed, apparently due to a childhood illness, Trigo struggled to control the brush. It required long hours for him to complete a canvas. To capture the Rescue of the Colors episode from the Civil War, Trigo worked closely with W.W.H. Davis to get all of the details of his painting accurately, capture all of those details accurately. And in the process, he paid local residents, and at this time he was living and working in North Wales in Montgomery County, he paid local residents to serve as models, dressing them in original uniforms, outfitting them with Civil War weapons and other gear for authenticity. Now, when Trigo completed the painting, he hoped to take it on tour. And this was something that was done in this era, especially with large canvases like this, to take it on tour to make some extra money. He felt that he had really executed the painting at something of a cut rate for his native county, and he felt he deserved some consideration, because by this point the painting had been presented to the Bucks County Historical Society. So he petitioned the board of the Historical Society to allow him to take the painting on tour. Unfortunately for Trigo, the Historical Society turned him down. And Trigo blamed Davis and wrote one of the most scathing letters that we can probably have in the Historical Society's archives, using pretty harsh and direct language. And I've sort of highlighted sections of the letter. He says that he's talking to Davis now. He says that the reputation which you enjoy at home and among your neighbors for vanity, meanness, audacity, hypocrisy, and double dealing is well founded. Then he goes on to say, if there is still a spark of manhood left in your twisted and callous old heart, you will refrain from mentioning my name in your presentation remarks when the painting was presented at the Bucks County Courthouse in Doylestown. So needless to say, Trigo was not a fan of W.W.H. Davis because of this incident. So that's a little bit of the inside story of not only the scene that's portrayed, but also what played out behind the scenes after the painting was completed and presented and entered the collections of the Historical Society. So now on to something a little different. This is a painting of the Bewley Farm that was once located in Wrightstown Township, Bucks County. It was painted by Thomas Otter about 1880. The house was believed to have been constructed around 1705, and some believed it to be the oldest still standing in the county by the 1870s. It was torn down in 1877, and the artist, Otter, visited and sketched it just before its demolition in 1876. Now, the house was, and here is a commemorative teacup in which the Bewley house was prominently featured for the Bucks County Bicentennial. Now, the house was alleged, the Bewley house was alleged to have been the birthplace of Revolutionary War General John Lacey. Though there's a little bit of confusion about this. He may have been born in Buckingham instead of Wrightstown. But in any case, Lacey was placed in command of the Bucks County Militia in 1778 during the Revolution. Although he'd served in earlier engagements, he was pretty young and inexperienced in command. His undersupplied, poorly disciplined, and part-time soldiers were also spectacularly ineffective in guarding supplies or fighting the British. Lacey was in command at the Battle of Crooked Billet, which is in the vicinity of today's Hatboro, when his 400 or so troops were attacked by British regulars and local loyalists and soundly defeated. Many of the militia were actually killed, their bodies mutilated, and even set on fire by the loyalists. In 1861, this monument to the Battle of Crooked Billet was erected along York Road. In 1967, it was moved and re-erected on the grounds of what was Crooked Billet Elementary School in Hatboro. And just this year, as I understand it, a new school was finished and the monument was restored and again re-erected. Now, among the first projects undertaken by the Bucks County Historical Society after its founding in 1880, and remember, this Bewley Farm painting was painted about 1880. Among the first projects the Historical Society conducted was the celebration of the county's bicentennial, hence that teacup that Otter designed and was selling as a sideline. The Society organized a major exhibition in 1882 featuring art, natural history, and an array of historical artifacts at the Fairgrounds Exhibition Building, which is now the parking lot at Central Bucks West High School. So this painting, the Bewley Farm painting, then owned by Davis, was included in the bicentennial exhibition. And this is a photo of the interior of that exhibition in 1882. Now, Otter created numerous drawings and engravings of historical structures and sites in Bucks County. Although he died in 1890, Davis used many of his illustrations in the second edition of Davis's book, The History of Bucks County, published in 1905. And the Bewley House engraving, the same image of the house seen on the teacup, was featured in Davis's history. So now on, we're leaving Davis for a moment and moving over to the other pillar of the Historical Society's history, and that is Henry Mercer. As it turns out, a number of individuals important in Henry Mercer's life were also artists, or at least they dabbled in art. His mother enjoyed drawing and painting. And in the exhibit, the 200 Years exhibit, there is this painting done by his great aunt, Margaret Mercer. There's watercolors by his cousin, Jane Bird McCall, who traveled with Mercer some in Europe in the 1880s. And there's paintings by Mercer's brother-in-law, Hubert Fiddler von Easterborn. Now here is Mercer's great aunt, Margaret Mercer. She was the daughter of John Francis Mercer, who was a Maryland planter, a politician, and the 10th governor of Maryland. And Margaret devoted her life to teaching young women and advocating for emancipation. She was an advocate for African colonization. She freed slaves she had inherited from her father's estate. She also established schools for young women and taught art at Cedar Park, Maryland, which was a Mercer family estate, and in Virginia. And 3 of her paintings, likely copied like that first one that I showed, or derived from European works, were inherited by Henry Mercer and later hung in his home, Font Hill. Now here's another artist in the family who I mentioned just a moment ago. Henry Mercer's sister, Leela, met her future husband, Hubert Fiddler von Easterborn, and here's his portrait, while traveling with her brother Henry on a trip down the Danube in 1886. While wintering in an inn in Dürnstein, Austria, Leela encountered von Easterborn, who was then on leave from the Austrian army and staying at the same hostelry, by coincidence just down the hall from her room. So the couple fell in love. They were later married in 1888 in the gardens of Aldi. And here is their wedding photograph with Leela looking a bit demure and Hubert looking quite proud and Prussian. And they were married again in 1888. The couple honeymooned in Maine, then settled in Austria, not far from the Bavarian border. An officer and an amateur artist, Fiddler would later paint his wife's mother and father, Mary and William Mercer. And here is Fiddler's painting of Mary Mercer, Henry Mercer's mother. Now, these are the earliest paintings in the Historical Society's collection, this pair of portraits. And these go back to the American Revolution. And one of the things to realize about the Revolution in Bucks County is that the political and military landscape here was more akin to that of a civil war. The loyalties were deeply divided. Some here supported the patriot cause, some remained deeply loyal to the crown, and some, many pacifist Quakers and Mennonites, just desperately wanted to stay neutral and stay out of the whole thing. Some of these divisions played out in the lives of this particular couple, and this is Richard and Marjorie Gibbs of Bensalem, Bucks County. Now, after they were donated to the Historical Society in 1975, the portraits were attributed by a scholar to the well-known artist Charles Willson Peale. And here's a portrait of Peale in his museum in Philadelphia in 1822. It's assumed the portraits were painted around 1778, 1779, when Peale, who was a soldier and a supporter of the Patriot cause, had fled Philadelphia along with his family and resided in Northampton Township, Bucks County. He may actually have painted multiple versions of these works for the Gibbs, as other examples of similar size and sitters' postures are known to the ones in our collection. So what do we suppose the Gibbs are thinking about as they are sitting for their portraits in the midst of the Revolution? Well, let's have a little history. So Richard Gibbs was born in 1723 in Wiltshire, England. He arrived in Philadelphia in 1746 and accepted a position teaching school in Bensalem Township. While teaching, he met Judge Lawrence Groudon, a wealthy gentleman and a rising star in Pennsylvania politics. And Groudon and his wife lived at Trevos, an estate in Bensalem. And you can see the Trevos estate here in the upper left of this map from circa, well, the map is circa 1681, but it's obviously overlaid with later landowners. So So Groudon offered Gibbs a position as his clerk, and Gibbs took up residence in a wing of the manor house. Gibbs married Marjorie Harrison in 1753 and continued to live in the West Wing. And here is Trevos in Bensalem. The house still stands today with a close-up of the West Wing of the house in which Richard Gibbs and Marjorie Gibbs resided. In the same year, that is 1753, Lawrence Groudon's daughter Grace married Joseph Galloway and also moved into Trevos. And in 1770, the judge died. The Galloways continued to live in Trevos, and Richard and Marjorie Gibbs, having received a considerable inheritance from the judge, built their own home, Eddington, on the Bristol Pike. At the onset of the Revolution, Joseph Galloway and Richard Gibbs took opposite paths. Galloway sided with the Tories, staying loyal to the crown and opposing independence. Gibbs, on the other hand, became an ardent patriot, contributing substantial sums to the cause. And at different times, both were chased from their homes in Bensalem, Galloway by armed patriots and Gibbs by British troops. When the British later abandoned Philadelphia, Galloway fled for England. And Gibbs returned home and later became sheriff of Bucks County. So ironically, the man born in England, Gibbs, becomes the patriot, while Galloway, born here in America, died an Englishman. And here again, I mentioned that the manor house Trevos still stands. It is in the location indicated by the red arrow here in this map of Bensalem Township, and is currently owned by Bensalem Township. So let's talk about this formidable woman, Elizabeth Means Hart. The painting is by Robert Street. It's dated 1831. And Elizabeth was the wife of Colonel William Hart. And actually, she was her husband's cousin, as it turns out. The couple married in 1776. Now, according to an early chronicler of the Hart family, it said that while sitting for her portrait by Street, Elizabeth impressed the artist repeatedly by quoting lengthy passages from the Bible word for word. She apparently maintained this ability until the time of her death at the age of 87. With her husband, Elizabeth raised a family of 8 children. And in the exhibit, we're also able to include 2 monogrammed silver artifacts with Elizabeth Hart's initials, a sugar tongs and a ladle. But here's another item of silver, Colonel William Hart's spurs. Elizabeth's husband was an ardent supporter of American independence and a descendant of a Scots-Irish family that first settled in Plumstead Township. More about the spurs in a minute. But about the Hart family, the Harts were members of the Presbyterian congregation at Deep Run in Plumstead. William Hart was raised there, but after the Revolution moved to the crossroads now known as Hartsville in Bucks County. And there he operated an inn, the sign of which, not surprisingly, was a Hart. And he and his wife joined the Neshaminy Warwick Presbyterian Church. He died in 1830, just a year prior to his wife's portrait. Here's an image of what was once the Hart Tavern in Hartsville. The building was torn down years ago. I think there's a gas station here on the property currently, but this was Colonel Hart's Tavern. Now, the incident for which he's best known was his leadership of a group of militia who captured and killed the outlaw Moses Doane in 1783. Doane was a member of a group widely known as the Doane Gang. He'd grown up in Plumstead. And the Doanes were in some measure Tory sympathizers during the Revolution, but also conducted numerous robberies and thefts of livestock throughout southeastern Pennsylvania, primarily to benefit themselves. Learning that Moses and 2 other family members were holed up in a cabin along Tohickon Creek, Hart organized a small party and surprised the Doanes. 2 escaped, but Moses was pinned down and shot to death on the floor of the cabin. And 1 member of the posse, a Major Kennedy, was mortally wounded during the melee. This is a very fanciful image from an almanac in the 1840s attempting to capture the incident where Major Kennedy was mortally wounded and Moses Doane was killed. So we don't know if the spurs that we saw earlier were worn that day by Colonel William, but they certainly descended in the Hart family and have long been connected with William Hart. Now here's a handsome couple, Philip H. and Margaret Fretz. The paintings, the portraits were painted by Doylestown artist Samuel Dubois in 1886. Now Philip here was the son of a prosperous farmer, a contractor, and a community booster, also by the name of Philip K. Fretz. And they resided in the vicinity of what was once known as Fretz Valley, which is near where Almshouse and Easton Roads cross, just south of Doylestown. And there was once an established inn there, actually, operated by the family. Looking on an 1891 map, we see several Fretz houses. Here's Charles Fretz. We also have a painting of the Charles Fretz farm in the exhibit. We have this farm down here, which was Philip Fretz's, the individual in the portrait, his first residence, which he built and later was lived in by his brother. And then he moved up here closer to Doylestown, and we'll see, learn more about that in a moment. Philip, the younger, first worked in the silver plate trade in New York City. Then he traveled to San Francisco, where he engaged in the banking business. When he returned to the Doylestown area, he first built that home south of the present Almshouse on Easton Road, but later constructed, again, his new residence up here near the borough. He also owned a milling business, served as Justice of the Peace, and held a position with the old Bucks County Trust Company at the corner of Broad and East Court Streets, which was later the Melinda Cox Library and is now a private residence. In 1871, he married Margaret Johnson, with whom he had 6 children, though only 3 survived. Philip died in 1910. Now in 1879, Philip and Margaret built and moved into Ingleside, near what was once the Turk Hotel. The architect of the house here was Thomas Cernea, who designed a number of local buildings in the Doylestown area. Now, perhaps some of you may recognize this property. It still stands and is part of what was once called the Tabor Home for needy and destitute children just south of Doylestown. The original home has been modified a bit since it was acquired from heirs of Philip and Margaret in 1913. The Tabor Home was affiliated originally with the Lutheran Church. More recently, the facility became Tabor Children's Services, and major construction is now going on at the site. Actually, I went out there this morning and just took this picture. So you can see here, this is the Tabor home that was constructed over here, but we can still see Ingleside, although slightly diminished by the fact that there's no longer this tall mansard roof on the tower here. But the house is still intact, and they are preserving the house around all of the other construction that's going on currently on the property. Now, we met William Trigo a little bit earlier in the context of the Rescue of the Colors painting and in his rather savage letter to W.W.H. Davis. His studio, along with that of his father, Jonathan, was located behind the family's home in North Wales in Montgomery County, although Trigo had been born in Yardley. And this easel is the same one as in this photo of Trigo sitting in his studio in North Wales. This is on loan to us. The easel is on loan to us from a member of the Grimm family and in the exhibit currently. And in the early 1900s, and before Trigo's death by suicide in 1909, the artist took in several students, and among them was the promising Sellersville landscape painter Walter Baum, who studied under Trigo from about 1904 to 1909. Baum's wife Flora and the couple's first child, Marion, posed for a series of Trigo's sketches and paintings, and Baum later recalled that his mentor often went about North Wales with a cape over his shoulder, looking a bit French. Baum went on to say that Trigo certainly did shape his life. And at his death, Trigo thought enough of his former student to include Baum in a hastily written will, leaving his crank easel and painting materials to Baum. And this is a copy of Trigo's very very brief will done shortly before he committed suicide in North Wales, with item 5 being requesting that his old crank easel be given to Walter Baum. And the crank easel has remained in the Baum family, or descendants of the Baum family, since that time, and we're very fortunate and very appreciative that that they loaned it to this exhibition. So moving on to another character, this is Joseph Archambault, painted by an unidentified artist around 1840. And Archambault was born in France in 1796 and brought up at the court of Napoleon and Josephine. He was a graduate of a military academy and is believed to have fought and received a wound fighting with Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. Along with his older brother Achille, Joseph was one of 12 chosen by Napoleon to accompany him into exile on the island of St. Helena, where Joseph became part of the military household. Now, while Achille stayed with Napoleon in exile, the island's British governor sought to decrease the size of the former emperor's household and sent Joseph off the island in 1816. The two brothers, Joseph and Achille, would not see each other again for another 40 years. Joseph went first to England, where he joined in a short-lived plot to storm the island and free Napoleon. Although the plot was later abandoned, a home for Napoleon had actually been prepared in New Orleans, if that attack had actually gone forward. And here is a painting also in the exhibit titled Napoleon on the Island of St. Helena. We don't know that this painting was ever in the Archambault family, though it did come to the Historical Society from a donor in Newtown many, many years ago, and it's certainly tempting to think, why else would this painting exist unless it was somehow connected to Archambault and Archambault's family. So in any case, coming to America, Joseph Archambault eventually joined the household of Joseph Bonaparte, brother of Napoleon, who also had been instrumental in the initial plot to attack St. Helena. And Joseph Archambault first took up residence in Philadelphia and that at a farm in Bordentown. I'm sorry, Joseph Bonaparte had a residence in Philadelphia and a farm in Bordentown, New Jersey. And in 1821, Joseph Archambault moved with his young wife and infant son to Newtown, Bucks County, where he opened a hardware store, established a dental practice, and may even have served as postmaster. And in 1821, he bought the Brick Hotel in Newtown, seen here about the time of the Civil War. Joseph Archambault went from the court of France to owning a hotel in Newtown, Bucks County, in only a relatively few years. Shortly afterwards, he joined also the Union Troop of Bucks County, of which he was made lieutenant and later promoted to captain. And his militia uniform is also on view in the exhibit. Now, during the Civil War, Archambault enlisted in the 2nd Pennsylvania Cavalry and was commissioned captain of Troop A. He died in Philadelphia in 1874. Now, both Joseph and his brother, Achille, received legacies from Napoleon after the latter's death. And Joseph later named 2 of his children, Napoleon and Josephine, not surprisingly. Another son was named after the Marquis de Lafayette, one of Washington's, of course, most trusted generals during the Revolution. And here is the dashing Lafayette Archambault, the son of Joseph, painted around 1850, also in our exhibition. Now, even as late as the early 1800s, members of the Society of Friends, the Quakers, continued to view art as something of a less than useful occupation. Born into a Quaker family, Jonathan Trigo, the father of William Trigo, no doubt had to justify his pursuit of painting when he was still a young man. As a result, Trigo approached painting something like a trade. He painted the likenesses of local residents and often their animals, meeting the community's need to visually record its members. His carpenter brother Smith made furniture. Jonathan crafted portraits. Jonathan, by the way, later drifted away from the Friends, though, eventually joining the Anglican Church. Now, while portraiture predominated in Jonathan Trigo's work, he also produced some fancy or genre paintings and a few landscapes. And here's one of them. This is a Bucks County farm, and this was the farm on which Trigo was raised just outside of Pineville on Windy Bush Road on the south slope of Buckingham Mountain in Upper Makefield Township, Bucks County. He painted this work in October 1850, 3 months after his father's death. And here you see the approximate location of this. The house still stands along Windy Bush Road. This is Windy Bush Road here in Upper Makefield, coming from Pineville over here in at the left in Buckingham Township. The property passed to his older brother, Horace, who ultimately sold the farm. And perhaps it was his father's death and the subsequent plan to sell the property that produced a pang of homesickness in Trigo, who by this time had studied art with Samuel Du Bois in Doylestown and had enrolled in the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. In any event, he produced at least a couple of paintings to help remember his boyhood home. And more than 30 years later, in 1882, Trigo's homestead painting was exhibited at the Bucks County Bicentennial, along with another work, the Homestead Kitchen, now apparently lost. And here again is another view of the Bucks County Bicentennial exhibition. Unfortunately, we can't see the homestead paintings in this particular photograph, although another work by Jonathan Trigo, this picture of George Smith that hangs right here, is a Trigo painting and has entered the collection and is in the 200 Years of Bucks County Art exhibition. This painting here is also in the museum's collection, so it's fun to sort of try to pick out some things that in 1882 were there in the bicentennial exhibit, and now in 2020 are here at the Mercer Museum. So here's another coming to America story, sort of like the Archambaults. Lawrence Johnson, who at one time was the owner of the estate portrayed in this painting entitled Landsdowne, was born in England in 1801. When only 12, he'd begun to learn the printing trade. In 1818, he sailed with his parents to the United States. And the family settled first in Albany, and Johnson obtained a position with a local newspaper in nearby Troy. And not long after, he went to New York and eventually settled in Philadelphia. He established himself as an expert in the stereotyping business. And stereotypes were entire blocks of type created from molds from which books and other publications could be more efficiently printed and reprinted without having to resort to setting individual letters by hand in a form every time. Johnson also became successful with the newer process of electrotyping and even more efficient printing technology. So he and his family resided first on Spruce and later on Pine Street in Philadelphia, but in 1851 he purchased this property, Landsdowne, a farm and country estate along the Chamonix Creek in Bristol Township. And here at the center of this red circle is you can see Landsdowne and its location in Bristol here. The Landsdowne property was extensive. It amounted to more than 87 acres and included a mansion, a carriage house, stable, a tenant houses, a large barn, a spring house, an ice house, greenhouses, and even a 10-pin bowling alley. After Lawrence Johnson died, there was some attempt to sell the property. This is a broadside in the Historical Society's collection advertising Landsdowne for sale and noting all of the amenities, and they were again extensive, of the property. Now, Lawrence Johnson suffered a stroke while conducting a business meeting in 1859 and died shortly thereafter. And this, by the way, is Lawrence Johnson. At his death, the value of his entire estate, which included Landsdowne, amounted to $800,000. This is in 1860 dollars, but it would be about $25 million in today's dollars. Sometime after his death, Johnson's children arranged for the disposition of the property and allowed it to remain in the family, which it did for many years. Now, coming back to the painting for just a moment, And one of his children later recalled that about 1855, an artist had come to stay with the family and produce this painting of the family's estate, and said the painting hung for many, many years at the top of the first stair landing in the Johnson home. The figures depict each of the Johnson children as well as the nurse who took care of them. And it's rare to find a description of where a painting hung originally in someone's house. Unfortunately, of course, with subsequent development in Bristol Township, the construction of the Turnpike, I-95, I think this property is now somewhere under the Pennsylvania Turnpike, so it does not exist any longer. Now, we all love a mystery, and this painting is that. It is a bit of a mystery. This was donated to the museum in the 1990s, and purported to depict a farm outside of Doylestown. In fact, there are 2 or 3 other paintings very similar to this, or related in some way to this work. One is a painting of the Bucks County almshouse, which you see here. Here's the almshouse. Here's the hospital, which still stands. The almshouse does not stand any longer, but the so-called hospital constructed in 1865 is still standing. And then the almshouse farm. This is Almshouse Road right here, and this is Route 611. So this painting, clearly by the same artist, got about, looking at the clothing here, around, and the bicycle, probably around 1890. And then this painting, which is almost identical to the first one I showed in the Historical Society's collection, this one is in the collection of the National Gallery of Art in Washington, and is simply entitled, again, Farm Outside of Doylestown, Bucks County. And we've got a couple of individuals around here, down here at the foreground of the painting, and some house in the back that can't quite be discerned. So aside from the almshouse, what farm or farms do these paintings depict? Well, it's possible that they portray a farm that's no longer standing. The one built by Philip Fretz, who we met earlier, and later lived in by his brother south of the Almshouse Road off the present Route 611. This photograph here, which looks north on Route 611 to Doylestown, you see the old trolley tracks. This is around 1900. You see the almshouse farm over here on the left. The property up here on the ridge on the right is the Charles Fretz farm, which some may know more as the Blueberry Hill property. And then the entrance here is to this other Philip Fretz property, later John Fretz property, which I suspect is the property seen in the painting. If you look at this map of this area, this is the Philip Fretz. This is an 1876 map. This shows this property that we were just looking at. Here's the Charles Fretz farm. We were just looking up Easton Road here, and the Philip Fretz farm on the right. And what's interesting is this steam sawmill that was on the property of Philip Fretz. And if we go back to our painting, one of the things we see in the back here is what would appear to be most likely a sawmill, just from the look of the building itself. So my supposition is that this is meant to portray the Philip Fretz farm, and this, and also the one in the National Gallery. Can't prove that at this point. But the other intriguing thing, and I'm looking at this fountain here, this would be, if anybody remembers, or anybody who's in this Zoom knows where AAA used to be, going south on Easton Road from Almshouse Road. In back of that property, I drove back there at one point and found what the remains of a fountain back there. So my guess is that this is that property. And so we don't know who painted these. It could have been a resident of the almshouse, since all the paintings seem to have been clustered right around that area, or perhaps a member of the Fretz family. So that's kind of some of the fun detective work behind some of these paintings. So here's a story of two artists and two paintings, both portraying the same subject. This is the Mansion House, an inn once located on the southwest corner of Main and State Streets in Doylestown. The one at the top left was painted by E.J. Wilson in 1879, and the other, apparently copied from the Wilson work, was painted by James M. Kane, an artist, restorer, and at one time an assistant librarian of the Historical Society. The copy was given to the BCHS not long after Kane painted it in 1927. However, the Wilson work did not come into our collection until 2006. It's uncertain where Kane would have seen it, but apparently it had stayed in the Doylestown area. His reason for making the copy is unknown. What is known is that the Mansion House, originally a residence, was established by the McGill family, who owned it until about 1854. When the county seat was moved to Doylestown in 1812, the McGills had enlarged the building to 3 stories, as you see it here in these paintings. And in 1879, it was remodeled further in keeping with the architectural style of the day. Apparently, there was some distress expressed by local residents at the aggressive and irreverent treatment of the Doylestown landmark as it was being improved. This was expressed in the local paper. So perhaps someone arranged to have Wilson paint the old structure just prior to its renovation. By the early 20th century, the building served as a J.F. Moore department store. And today, and for many years, it has housed the Paper Unicorn card and gift shop in Doylestown. This shows the Moore store about 1915, but the building has not changed very much. Yet it's interesting to look at the buildings on the right here and compare those with the painting, because this building is clearly still there in 1915. So this is a work by a woman, an artist, Mary Pemberton Ginther, done around 1935 of the Thompson Neely house, which is now in Washington Crossing State Park. And during the Revolution, the Thompson Neely house served as a temporary regimental army hospital during Washington's winter campaign of 1776-77. His general, Lord Stirling, used it as his headquarters, and ill and injured soldiers were brought to the home for medical treatment and recovery. A young officer from Virginia by the name of James Monroe was seriously injured during the First Battle of Trenton and convalesced here. And in 1817, of course, he became the 5th President of the United States. Wounded with Monroe was William Washington, a distant cousin of the Commander-in-Chief. And he too recovered there in the Thompson Neely house. And Captain James Moore of the New York Artillery died on Christmas Day of camp fever and is buried, along with a number of other soldiers on the property. And this monument down here commemorates those soldiers' graves. Now, the house was built over many years with several additions by members of the Thompson and Neely families. About 1765, owner Robert Thompson's daughter, Elizabeth, married an Irish immigrant, William Neely, and both families resided in the home. The prosperous families engaged in the milling and distillery business. Now, by the 1920s, the Thompson-Neely house had fallen into considerable disrepair. But the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania purchased it in 1926 and ultimately restored the property. This photograph was taken in the 1930s and shows the house as Ginther portrayed it essentially in her circa 1935 painting. So finally, and to wrap up, we come to Edward Trigo, who was a cousin of William Trigo, who we met earlier. And here are 2 of his watercolors, and several others of Edward Trigo's watercolors are featured in the exhibit. And he pursued painting chiefly as an avocation. He was born in Illinois, but he spent most of his life in Doylestown. His father, a retired farmer, built this house on Maple Avenue, which still stands, in Doylestown when Edward Trigo was 24. And Edward probably resided in the house as a boarder at least until 1886 when he married Rebecca Ely. Trigo later served as editor of the Doylestown Republican newspaper and was a member of the staff of other local papers, including the Intelligencer and Democrat. As an artist, he also sometimes exhibited in watercolor shows in Philadelphia and other cities. And this is about the only photo that I've been able to locate of Edward Trigo, and to his right is his wife, Rebecca. Around 1910, just as Henry Mercer was engaged in building Fott Hill, Trigo became associate editor of the magazine Cement Age and later served in the editorial and publicity departments of the Portland Cement Manufacturers and National Asphalt Associations. Here is the cover of Cement Age in 1911 when Trigo was serving as associate editor. And here's Trigo's concrete connection, so to speak, to Henry Mercer and Fott Hill. In that same issue, that 1911 issue, Trigo does two sketches which are reproduced in Cement Age. And to honor the construction of the house, he quotes a ode to Henry Chapman Mercer penned by Charles Conrad Abbott, who was a fellow archaeologist and associate of Mercer's, an ode to Mercer and Fott Hill. So that's the concrete connection. And then to bring us completely full circle and to conclude, in 1894, Edward drew this watercolor portrait of the Historical Society's founder, W.W.H. Davis, in 1894. And of course, we began by seeing Davis calmly holding his wounded arm as he directed his color guard to rescue the colors. So thank you very much for listening. That brings us to a close of Beyond the Frame, Part 2. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions that anyone has.
Cory, thank you so much. That was so interesting. And now I've seen both Beyond the Frame, so can gladly say I know a lot more about the paintings in our exhibit. I would love to echo what Cory said and say that if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and then I'm happy to pose them to Cory and to answer any questions that those of you out there might have. So while I wait for anyone to put their questions in, you know, I'd love to ask a little more about the different farm landscapes that we have. You know, some of them seem more realistic than others. And do you kind of have any idea about any of the ties between kind of the style of the art of those landscapes? I know like with the Landsdowne estate and the Fretz farm, they do have like different feelings to them.
Yes. Yeah, well, that reflects the difference in training of the artist, you know, whether an artist is academically trained, you know, we know, or even Trigo's painting, you know, My Homestead. By 1850, Trigo had studied at the Pennsylvania Academy. He had studied with other artists. E.J. Wilson, I don't know quite enough about his training, although so many artists, you know, also studied at the Pennsylvania Academy. And that sort of academic art is in contrast to individuals who did not have any formal training, but had still some talent with a brush. And of course, they're often referred to as folk or naive painters because they had problems with perspective, particularly, and being able to place the images, you know, that they were painting sort of accurately and in correct proportions. But nonetheless, you know, I think in many cases the folk paintings, you know, are completely charming, and they provide in many ways as much evidence of what these farms looked like, or at least what their components were, as you know, as the more academic paintings. We never know exactly if the farms are being rendered with photographic precision. Probably not. There's probably things that are being overlooked as they're trying to execute a painting that's going to satisfy the wishes of the farm owner who really wants a pretty picture of his farm and something to be proud of. So, you know, we're pretty sure we're not getting a photographic portrait of the farms. Right. But in any case, we are getting something, and often these paintings do capture interesting elements like the sawmill, for example, or farm equipment being used that allows us to use these paintings to illustrate life on the farm in the latter part, in this case, of the 19th century.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a quick question from Sue, wondering who painted the two Archambault portraits?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't know. We don't know either. Neither artist is identified. It might be that an art historian, particularly the one of Lafayette Archambault, where the artist clearly has considerable skill. And it might be possible to identify that artist with someone who is knowledgeable about 19th century artists working in Philadelphia, which is where that painting was executed. Whether it can be officially attributed to, say, a Sully or, you know, somebody like that, that is beyond my ability. But I suppose that would be possible. The portrait of Joseph Archambault in his militia uniform, no one has been able to identify that artist, unfortunately. In many cases, you know, at that time in the 1840s, you would have gone to Philadelphia probably if you wanted a fine portrait painted. Bucks County hadn't yet quite developed the Jonathan Trigos and Samuel Du Boises, who came on just a little bit later as recognized portrait artists, you know, in Bucks County. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't know in either case.
Yeah, so some mystery there that is still goes unsolved, and I think we have a few other portraits in the exhibit as well that have unknown artists. Is that true, Cory?
Yes, and I will say that that painting of Lafayette Archambault we did have conserved for this exhibit. It was conserved by Paul Gratz locally, and he puzzled over the painting as well, but he couldn't identify the artist.
Well, maybe one day we'll know the answer. Just a couple comments from our guests. Veronica says, fantastic preservation, so wonderful to dig deep into Bucks County's art and history. So thank you, Cory, so much for helping to bring that to the forefront. And Jean also just wants to thank us because she is now in California and can't see the exhibit in person, but both of the presentations have made her homesick for Bucks County. So hopefully we are able to provide some of that home feeling, and being able to hear about us virtually is great, that we can reach people as far as California as well. I don't see any more questions coming in. So with that, I will conclude today thanking Cory very much for your time in providing this talk. And thank you so much to all of you who joined us today for a nice lunchtime lecture. I want to thank you all, and I hope that you will join us for some of our future virtual programs. And if possible, come visit us here at the museum. So with that, I will conclude today's virtual lecture, and everyone have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.